welcome back to Cityline. With me, I have somebody who truly is a peacemaker and a community leader here in Pierce County. I'm talking about the executive director of the Center for Dialogue and Resolution, Maralise Hood Quan. Maralise, you are so busy. Thank you for joining us today. I'm sure I pulled you away from something that was groundbreaking, yes?
Yes, the center is making history this week with our district court. I just left 40 people practicing how we're going to hold small claims mediations online. We've got court clerks, we've got mediators, we have actual student interns from UPS, and I told them all that the only thing that could drag them away is the possibility of saying to the great public, can you believe we have amazing volunteers willing to step in and help resolve conflicts? Thank you so much, and thanks to Zoom. I didn't have to get in a car. I'm here 4 minutes later. Thank you, Amanda.
Well, thank you. And who would have ever thought we'd be thanking Zoom? Because there are moments when we are done with Zoom. And that in itself leads me into why you're here today, Maralise. We're here to talk about trauma and trauma-based decisions that we are making because of the pandemic. So first, could you give us a definition of how the Center for Dialogue and Resolution defines trauma?
And as the leader of a nonprofit who invites people with conflict into our organization, we have really embraced what does it mean to be trauma informed. And yet what I realize as the leader of this organization back in April, we are used to talking about we're trauma informed for our clients. And right now what we realize is every single person in our community is living trauma. So it's worthwhile taking a moment to say, what is that? And if you look up the definition, this is the one that particularly informs how I act and how I interact. And it's to consider that a traumatic event is an incident where there's physical, emotional, spiritual, and psychological harm. And we react or feel threatened, anxious, or frightened. And if it's within that context that we're talking about, there's different levels of trauma. There's acute, you're in a car accident, so you're traumatized. There is chronic, ongoing, consistent, over and over again, chronic fatigue, chronic problems. But the one that I think that we have not delved into about how it has impacted our anxiety and how we interact is what's referred to as complex. And complex is, over a period of time, multiple incidences and how it interplays interpersonally and socially. And so if you look at the global pandemic, there's not one person who is not traumatized by the threat and fear of losing their life due to the virus. If you look at disproportionately how our lives are in danger and how awareness amongst those who may not be of the marginalized, such as African American, Black people, African American, people of color, that systemic racism and marginalization and discrimination puts us into an amazing, complex, traumatic experience. And that is how we start all of our conversations. And it's so much part of where we are and what we're doing. Sometimes we're not even aware of it.
Oh, and when you say, Maralise, that we're not aware of it, help us understand what a trauma-informed or a trauma-based decision, what does it look like? You mentioned, the fight, flight, freeze. But when we are in our home and we are having a hard time dealing with a coworker on Zoom, or we are having a hard time carving out space for ourselves, what are some things or some symptoms that we can be aware of to say, wait a minute, this is trauma?
More often than not, you recognize it because you are not connecting. This is happening in the communication. But also it happens in terms of where we direct our anger or our resentment or some of the feelings that just kind of bubble up without thought. So I'm going to take one simple step to think about it. This past week, the center experienced two different difficult situations. One is, you mentioned already, trying to connect with people over Zoom, and we all feel this limitation of this sort of digital divide. But the other possibility in times of virus is to be able to put a mask on and to be able to have a conversation. And just by my covering my mouth right now, I'm assuming the people watching us are home, but would she take her hand down? I can't tell what she's saying. That barrier to our communication, what we find right now is people are angry and yelling and screaming about someone telling me to put a mask on, and yet we're not addressing the virus is where the threat is. So it's that disconnect, not connecting as human beings, but also not being aware of really what is the root cause. So if you are feeling threatened, if you're feeling anxious, you tend to react versus respond. And a react is that knee-jerk reaction. You just mentioned them: fight, flight, and fear. It can be anger. It can be personalized. Someone else, you're the creep that makes me wear a mask, rather than I'm choosing to protect. It's that redirecting. And so those symptoms of when you feel that you have said X and someone is profoundly hurt by your statement and all of a sudden begins attacking you, that attack gives you some insight that they're feeling hurt, that is the result of them feeling threatened and anxious, and how are we going to be able to calm them down? That goes to the first thing of trauma informed, is to acknowledge the dynamic that's happened. To actually acknowledge the harm or the threat of harm, to validate that this is normal, that you have these emotions and that you do react without necessarily rational thought, and to recognize that you have a choice of how to respond. And you and I have talked a little bit about the training that we do with those who are interacting with those who are homeless on the streets or experiencing homelessness. That issue of reaction comes from our ancient, like way back when we lived in caves. We have an amygdala back here, and it ensures that we survive. We run away from the saber-toothed tiger, we freeze so he doesn't notice it, or we actually sort of not sure what we're going to do and we try to fight it. That has helped us survive. Think about it from this perspective, Amanda, because I know you love poetry. Those who sat outside the caves and listened to the rustling of the grasses and wrote poetic things, they were gobbled up by the saber-toothed tiger. And those of us who saw in every rustle of a grass the potential of a super-tooth, we're still alive. That is so ingrained in us that in times of trauma, we need to acknowledge and validate that that is what we're feeling. Let it be, and you can work through it rather than ignore it and begin to have a conversation. And a couple of deep breaths will take you from the amygdala to the frontal cortex, where you can actually have a conversation and connect with the next person in front of you. That is sort of the reset that allows us. So one of the things you just asked is, what are the symptoms? If you see someone coming at you, make a statement and they come at you and they attack. If you cannot react with a counterattack and take a couple deep breaths, and the generosity and the solidarity that you can give to say, I hear that what I just said to you really provoked your anger. I need to understand, because that was not my intent, but I obviously did it. Help me understand, and you truly listen to what they say. And these are the steps. I don't know if you want me to walk right into the do-it-yourself conflict de-escalation. Is that the next step that I should offer?
I do, because you are painting the picture of, as Mayor Woodard has said, how to be more compassionate and kinder during these times. So please show us the way.
So we got 4 steps. We've taken everything that we do and tried to condense it into it. Obviously, it's the center. We spend a lot of time, like today, how can we do it better? But I think every person who lives in Tacoma, who's in Pierce County, can take these simple 4 steps. And it starts with the choice that we all have to respond as opposed to not react. But the hard thing is, if you've been personally attacked, or if you're really embarrassed and shamed by the idiocy that I've already made a couple missteps in my mouth today, we all are struggling. We're in trauma. We don't know what we're doing. We're failing openly and with humility. So if you can overcome your own shame that when someone steps up and says, hey, that was unacceptable, the words you used. A deep breath will change the chemistry of the adrenaline that's running through your body. It will change the blood pressure, and it'll get you from the amygdala to your frontal cortex and allow you to respond with grace and compassion.
So that's step one, yes?
Get ready to listen. So we're still going to listen, and listening means not talking over the other person. It means not interrupting them, and means not planning your thing. So step two, which you can do while you're listening, is to learn how the world looks from the other person's perspective. And I realized I'm looking at your face, Amanda, and not at the screen. I want to talk to everybody out there. See, you make mistakes. We just fail openly, transparently, and learn from it. So let's hope that my looking at the camera helps the rest. So we've listened with grace and a sense of we want to respond. And you're learning with curiosity. How does the world look according to Amanda, who just gave me this feedback that what I said was unacceptable? How can I understand what this word means to her? How can I understand what generational aspects of this have affected her? And how can I show up, still have to say what I needed to say in a way that's much kinder, much more compassionate, and Amanda can hear it, and together we can problem solve. So if you listen to learn, then the next step is you incorporate that, and you've dealt with the fact that I made you feel bad, Amanda, I'm so sorry. We get through that piece, then I still have the message that I need to give you about this big problem we have about setting the date and time for CityLine. And now it's not about you're a bad person, I'm a bad person. It's the two of us looking at the problem. We're able to understand it. And from that, listening, learning, and really expressing yourself with clarity in a way that the other can hear you, you can begin to make agreements in action. So it's listen, learn, talk, act is what we offer as do-it-yourself conflict resolution or de-escalation.
Boy, that is just pure gold, what you just gave us. So as people are listening to this, and I have 1 minute to go, and it never seems like it's enough time. If someone is experiencing this in their home, their workplace, their church, their synagogue, how can the Center for Dialogue and Resolution help?
Try it yourself first. And if you know enough to know you need help, we're there to help. We can mediate individual conflicts, home or work. We can train everybody on how to do this and make it a habit and to improve the ability and actually give some supports of how we hold each other accountable. We do a lot of actually conflict coaching. What happens if the other side doesn't want to engage and doesn't want to be involved? So there's mediation, there's training, and then we also do facilitation of really difficult conversations with having somebody who's not involved be part of it.
That's fantastic. Maralise, I cannot thank you enough for leaving that historic, groundbreaking moment with small claims and coming onto CityLine. Maralise, your words are gold, and they are a balm for our trauma-induced souls right now. I thank you for your Refresh Fridays that help us get ready for the next week. I need to have you back on here at least every month, if not 6 weeks, so you can help us deal with COVID in a very calm, serene way. Is that a deal?
You got it.
All right. Maralise, thank you so much to you and your team.
Thank you.
That wraps up another great segment of CityLine. Boy, it's been a whopper of a week, and Maralise has reminded me to remind you to be compassionate and kind, take deep breaths, wear your mask, check in on your neighbors, and remember that we are all in this together, and we never know what somebody is going through. So let's breathe in goodness and exhale kindness, and I'll see you right here in my kitchen next time on CityLine. Take care.
Tacoma's where you'll stay. Oh, you're from Seattle. Oh, you're from LA. Oh, you're over Tacoma's where you'll stay, yeah. Tacoma, that's my home, from the fires to the loam. Tacoma, that's my home, yeah. Tacoma, that's my home. Tacoma, that's my home, place I